Thank you so much for that, Jan. We're going to dive into that story a bit more. But before we do, just to remind you guys, this whole month we're looking at true community. So we're looking at what it means to build true community. And last week, we kind of looked at being an inclusive community. And we unpacked what that means and what that looks like. This week, we're going to look at something else. But before we do, I got a story to tell you. And this story all starts off with red cordial. So I got married very young. I was 19. I became a school chaplain around, oh gosh, my brain doesn't work good anymore. Like 20? Yeah, 21, 22, something like that. And one of my first jobs as a chaplain, they said, Chappie Matt, you need to do a breakfast program. I said, right, I got this. I'll do a breakfast program. So I get the kids there early. I have a nice breakfast set up, good cereals, Nutri-Grain, Wheat Bix. We did bacon, we did eggs. We were flash. It was a country school, so we didn't go half with anything. Like, we went all out. And I made the really smart idea at like around 7:30 a.m., 8 a.m. when kids were showing up to serve them all red cordial. Didn't go well. Kids had a little bit too much energy. And I think this story is great for what we're talking about today, because today we're looking at being a gracious community. So how do we be a gracious community? When someone messes up and gives kids red cordial at 7:30 in the morning. Not a good idea. I didn't know, though, I was American. We have sugar in everything. Like, if you would have seen my lunchbox as a kid, I had, like, zebra cakes, which are like these pastries covered in icing sugar. I had Kool-Aid all the time. Coke was, like, hydrating me sometimes as well. So, don't have the best experience. So how do we be gracious communities? What does that even mean? Do we really understand grace? Too often we seem to rope together grace and forgiveness. We put them together. Are they different things or are they the same thing? I mean, do we really know what this word means? Like, how often do you get in an argument with someone who might not be a Christian or might be a Christian, but they know that you're a Christian and they say, you're supposed to be gracious? Like, do we really know what that means? Is it just forgiveness? Is it just another word that's forgiveness? I think grace is so much greater than forgiveness. I love food, so I'll do a food analogy. I feel like forgiveness is like your icing on top of a cake, but grace goes like 15 layers deeper into the cake. There's that hidden surprise that they put in birthday cakes where there's that extra icing or the little lollies at the bottom. And I feel that's kind of how grace is. And there's a great quote I want to share to you. This is a quote from a Christian theology textbook, and this is what it says. Grace is another attribute, which is part of the manifold of God's love. By this we mean that God deals with his people not on the basis of their merit or worthiness, what they deserve, but simply according to their need. In other words, he deals with them on the basis of this goodness and generosity. This grace is to be distinguished from the benevolence or unselfishness that we just described. Grace, however, means that God supplies us with undeserved favors. He requires nothing from us. That makes grace sound a bit bigger than maybe we put it out for when we say it. Seems like it's a lot more than forgiveness. Talks about God not treating us with what we deserve, but treating us based on what we need. That means the grace of God is kind of like a never-ending ocean. We can never be too far from the grace of God. Because the grace of God that's revealed to Jesus Christ is something that we all get. There's nothing we can ever do to earn it. It doesn't treat us with how we deserve or give us punishments how we deserve. It treats us with what we need, with love and acceptance. And it's a never-ending ocean. We can't find stuff that separates us or puts us too far from receiving the grace of God. And I don't know if we've ever really sat to realize that amazing fact about grace. And then I wonder too, do we ever understand it in our head and our heart? Because it's one thing to know it up here, it's a different thing to know it in here. So how do we really go with that, if we're honest? And that's myself included. How often am I being gracious and showing God's grace to my family? Are there to people that annoy me? Am I really understanding this in my head and my heart? Do I really understand how much grace there is that God has for me? I think to kind of understand grace, though, it needs to be personal, right? We got to have this experience. This personal experience with God, and that's what kind of helps it go from our head to our heart. And there's all these stories in the Bible that help us understand a little bit more, that can help unpack this idea of grace. And I feel the story of Peter that we just briefly looked at in our Bible reading, that we're going to dive into more today, shows us grace in action. It shows us something amazing if we really dive into this story. So I just want to read John 18, verses 15 to 18 again. So Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood outside at the door, so the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. I want to pause there because sometimes we forget with this story. Before Peter denies in the next passage, Peter just got done chopping a guy's ear off because they were arresting Jesus. Like they were about to arrest Jesus, and Peter's like, no, I'm going to stand and fight. And he got all these guards. He pulls out his sword and cuts a man's ear off. Jesus tells him, no, we're not about that, put it away. And then, in some Bible accounts, it has that Jesus prays and the ear comes back and there's a miracle there. And then he lets them arrest him. So Peter and this other disciple are coming from that. They're coming from a situation where they just saw their friend and Messiah get arrested. It was so scary and so traumatic that they were willing to fight. So Peter got ready and he fought and got told not to. And then they're following Jesus along. And I just want to read what happens. The servant girl at the door said to Peter, you also are not one of this man's disciples, are you? He said, I am not. Now the servant and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. And I think sometimes we read that and we're like, why did Peter say no? It sounds like if you're reading the story, right, she's just asking a question. But I think we got to take a step back and realize that there's this angry mob that has just arrested Jesus, took him to a high priest's house. So you have this mob inside interrogating Jesus, questioning him. I don't think this servant girl was asking politely. I think Peter knew if he answered yes, there was a good chance he might end up right where Jesus was. There's a lot on the line. There's a lot of fear wrapped up in that moment. So Peter says, no, I don't know who he is. And I sometimes think we can read that and be like, oh, Peter's so slack. I would never do that. But I don't know if that's true. If there's an angry mob that just took someone you cared about and loved, and they were like interrogating them, and you knew what was about to happen, and they said, oh, do you know them? I think we might hide in the background a little bit as well. I think we might try to stay low. And that's kind of what you have Peter doing in this moment. Which is pretty crazy when we add in that he's chopped a guy's ear off to defend Jesus, and now he's trying to follow to figure out what's going on. And before he cut someone's ear off, Jesus told him he was going to deny him 3 times. And Peter's like, nah, I'd never do that, mate. I'll go with you to the end, We're bros. You're the Messiah. I got your back. Like, where you go, I go kind of thing. And Jesus was kind of like, nah, it's not going to work out like that. Just wait and see. And then you have Peter still kind of do what Jesus is predicting he's going to do. So Jesus is questioned. And I'm going to skip the passages where we read about him getting questioned, which ends with him getting hit in the face, taken to another high priest who's got more authority. And I want to read what happens next when Peter gets asked again if he knows Jesus. So this is after they take Jesus and bound him up again off somewhere else. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You also are not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." And again, I feel like they wouldn't have asked him nicely. It would have been finger pointing, like, "Oh, aren't you one of his disciples?" Angrily. He goes, "Oh, I'm not. It's not me." He's seen his mate bound up. He's scared, like any of us would be. So he denies knowing his friend, the Messiah, the guy that's healed his mother-in-law when she was sick, the man that's healed so many people, the man he said he would die for. I don't know him. I think that's amazing. Let's keep reading. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter again denied it, and at once a rooster crowed. Man. There was a person there who was in the garden. That means Peter would have recognized him. It lets us know it's a relative of someone who's got their ear cut off. And Peter still denies it. "Nah, I don't know him. I don't know what you're talking about." And then he hears a rooster crowed, just like Jesus told him it would happen. Can you imagine in that moment the pain and agony Peter must have felt? How upset he must have felt because he let his friend and the Messiah down. It would be like me denying Kim if Kim's in trouble for something and someone's yelling at Kim about it. And they're like, "Wait, aren't you Matt? You're her husband." "No, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never met that lady. I don't know. You have kids. What are you talking about?" "No, I'm just going to, oh, what? I got a phone call. Let me go." Like, that's kind of what Peter's doing. And then when you realize you've done something like that, what are the emotions you would feel? You got it wrong. Not just a little bit wrong. You acted like you didn't know someone who you said you would always have their back, who had your back every step of the way. It makes me think, what do you think Peter is deserving of the next time he sees Jesus? What do you think he deserves when he encounters Jesus again? I mean, he didn't know about the resurrection, even though Jesus hinted about it. They didn't know for sure. But when you think a resurrected Jesus from the grave, who knew that Peter did all of this stuff, if we were asking what Peter deserved, I think it would be for Jesus to step away and be like, "I don't know you. Who are you? You didn't have my back when it mattered. You weren't there for me. Like, get lost, mate. Go back on the boat. Keep fishing." Like, if you ask me, that's what kind of Peter's deserving of when he sees Jesus next. But he doesn't get that. In John chapter 21, verse 15 to 19, we read of a different encounter that Peter has with Jesus. And it's one of the first times he gets to speak with Jesus. So Jesus has kind of had breakfast with them. And this is what happened at the end of breakfast. And it says this: "When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?' He said to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' He said to him, 'Feed my lambs.' He said to him a second time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved. I want to pause there because I think it's funny. Peter gets grieved in this moment. Like he's getting frustrated. Like, why does he keep asking me this? And I love how the verse keeps going. "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This story shows the never-ending ocean of God's grace. Peter, in that moment, wasn't deserving of having Jesus even recognize him. But yet Jesus does, has a meal with him, has breakfast. Then ask him 3 times if he loves him. But then while he's asking, he's saying, "Hey, tend to my sheep. Tend to my lambs. Look after my disciples. Look after the people who are following me. I'm putting you in charge of this. I'm putting you in charge of looking after. Can you do that for me?" This is Peter who just denied him 3 times. But what does grace do? Grace doesn't give us what we deserve. It gives us what we need. And what Peter needed is an opportunity. He wanted opportunity to show Jesus he could do it. He wanted an opportunity to be a part of this Jesus thing again. And Jesus gives him that. Because Peter wasn't perfect after this moment. If you read the scriptures and you go into Acts, Peter still messes up. So he's not, after this moment, got it all together. But grace doesn't require that of us. I think it's important that we remember that. I love this quote from Max Lucato. Probably said his last name wrong, but you guys can forgive me. He makes children's books. Or he probably does more than that. Does he? He does a lot more? Well, I just know his children's books because I got kids. But I love this quote. "Grace is the voice that calls us to change and then gives us the power to pull it off." I want to read that again. Grace is the voice that calls us to change and then gives us the power to pull it off. And you see it in that moment with Peter and Jesus. Grace was calling Peter to change and gave him the power to do it. Peter made a clear choice. He made a choice to dive into the never-ending ocean of God's grace and slowly learn to swim. And it makes me think, are we willing to do the same? Are we willing to dive into the ocean of God's grace, to learn to swim in it? Learn to float in it when we can't swim. Learn to get help in it when we need to. Are we willing to do the same as Peter made the choice to do? I love this quote from Jerry Bridges. It says this: "Your worst days are never so bad that you are beyond the reach of God's grace. And your best days are never so good that you're beyond the need of God's grace." We need grace every day. No matter how deep we go in understanding God's grace, we're never going to be not needing it. On our worst day, we're never beyond the reach of God's grace. On the days you get it wrong and you mess up, on the days you do stuff you never thought you would do in your life, you're not beyond the reach of God's grace. That's why I think vulnerability is key when we dive in. If we're going to dive into God's grace, we have to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is one of our big values here at Highfields. And I think it's important for us to be vulnerable when we dive into God's grace. Admitting how much we need it, how much we're always going to need it, how far from perfect we really are, how every day we're in need of God's grace. No matter what we do, no matter how good I become or how bad I become, I'm always going to need God's grace. That takes a little bit of vulnerability. Because it means as I'm swimming in the ocean of trying to figure out God's grace, I'm going to ask for help when I need it. I'm going to be okay with people coming to help me because I know that I need it. It means I'll be vulnerable when I have a really close friend going through something, and I'll sit by them. I won't act like I have it all together. I won't act like I have all the answers because I'm vulnerable and I know that I don't. So I'll just sit, try to do my best to show them grace, like God's putting on my heart. Which brings me back to my red cordial story. Kim didn't expect that one. So I gave all the kids red cordial, one of my first breakfast clubs. Really proud moment of my chaplaincy career. You know, hyperactive preppies to year 6s running around, or year 7s then, running around everywhere at school. Very unhappy teachers, because imagine trying to get your kids to settle after Chappies played games with them, gave them breakfast, and gave them red cordial. It's not a good combo. It's not going to set the day well. And I still remember how much grace this school showed me. And I remember it from one person in particular. It's a teacher there named Mrs. Field. If you ever met Mrs. Field, she's a great teacher. But she knows what she wants, and she stands up for it, and she speaks it, which is great. You need that in a teacher and in a person. So I thought for sure she was going to, like, hammer me. You know? Like, I was scared. You know, it ended up where, like, got done and I was cleaning up, and she was coming into, you know, where the little kitchen area is, and I'm like, oh no. So Miss Jill Fields and me, she's gonna rip me to shreds. Come on, Chappie, be strong, be strong. But she didn't. She just asked me how the breakfast club went. I said, oh, it went good. She goes, what did you think about giving them red cordial? You think that was a great idea? And I laughed and I said, probably not. And she goes, yeah, I wouldn't do that again. And she was like, do you want some help with it? Like, how much grace is that? I messed up her whole day. She's got kids on red cordial pumped up, and she's like not chewing me out. And she did help me with it. She helped me with so many things throughout learning how to be a chappie. And I think that's what grace does, because I think in that moment, she could see I was probably already beating myself up about it. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So she could probably see that I was already hammering myself about it, things not going right, having kids go all hypo and stuff, and being like, oh goodness, the school's going to kick me out. I'm going to have no job. I'm going to have to go back to Pizza Hut and work. So she could probably see all of that. And she gave me what I needed, not what I deserved, because I probably deserved to have someone chew me out. Say, what are you thinking? You idiot. Why would you give kids red cordial? But I don't get that. I got what I needed. And that's what grace does for us. So let us dive into the never-ending ocean of God's grace and learn how to live out of it. Because I think this is what our world really needs. And if we're going to be a true community of believers, we got to make sure that we're being gracious. And it starts with us diving into God's grace and learning how to live out of that space. And I do not have the answers. I need to be totally upfront. If you think I'm good at it, I am probably not that great at it. But I'm learning. And I hope you guys will learn with me, because I think if we could be a gracious community, it would be pretty amazing to see what God does in and through this place. It'd be pretty great, like Carol said, when people had hard times at this church, if we met them with love and grace, not judgment, not telling them things to fix. Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing if we were known for that? Just want to close in prayer, and then the worship team's going to come up. God, I thank you so much for who you are. I thank you for your grace. I thank you that we can never do anything to be too far out of reach from your grace. And we're never good enough to be beyond your grace. We need it every day. I pray that you help us live in that space, to dive into your grace more and more, to learn how to live out of that space. Supporting other people within our church community, within our work communities, our friendship circles, and even just in the wider community by showing your grace. Operating out of a space where we have a deeper understanding of who you are. Help us become a true community like you've called us to be, God. And I pray that for anyone in this room, and myself included, that if we just need to have a fresh revelation of your grace, that you'll give that to us. That you'll pour it out on us. That you'll surround us with people that will show us your grace in the times that we need it. In your amazing name.